All right, this is not going to be my last Star Wars video. I've been obsessed with Star Wars since I was a kid. Obviously, seeing the originals in the theater, and then the prequels as they came out. Unfortunately, I saw the other ones as well. But this is about the original trilogy versus the prequels, and why the prequels are superior. Now, I am a nostalgic person. I do like to look back fondly on these things. And honestly, like, Empire might be the best of all six. And the end fight scene of Jedi may be one of the greatest moments in film ever, just because of the storyline and the way it climaxes. It climaxes a character from six different movies, and it is phenomenal. It is one of the greatest character arcs in all of cinema, and definitely the greatest villain character arc in all of cinema. The original Star Wars, although they set such a precedent, and George Lucas, using the Joseph Campbell's, the hero's myth and all of his other mythologies to sort of paint this world that every other fantasy writer, sci-fi writer, almost everyone has ripped off ever since. Harry Potter ripped it off. Everybody ripped it off ever since then. So when you watch the original trilogy, it can seem a little dated because you've seen these archetypes before. You've seen the hero's journey laid out like that many, many times since. But for its time, it was one of the first to do it like this. And that's why it stood out. Obviously, the actors, will never be another actor like Harrison Ford, and his portrayal of Han Solo is just phenomenal. Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, like, those two stand out as just remarkable. And you're never going to find characters like that again, actors like that again. So they really stood out as far as that goes. Obviously, George Lucas pioneered special effects, but the storytelling is very basic. Aside from the hero's myth, it's good versus evil, and there are sides, and that is it. And that is where the sort of original trilogy kind of stood with me. It's very simple. It was made for kids. It was made to be a morality, as far as we're telling kids what is good and what is bad, what is good, what is evil, and that's the way it is. And it was a admirable sort of thing for George Lucas to try to do. Obviously, he got a little bit more into politics by the time you get to Jedi, and the whole sort of allegory with the Ewoks defeating the Empire was a lot like, America, taking on Vietnam and all that stuff. So he did kind of lace a little bit in there, but it's not until the prequels where George Lucas really hit his stride, in my opinion. The socio-political stuff and just the plan and execution by the Chancellor, basically creating the Empire and creating himself as the Emperor, was pretty phenomenal. It arcs 3 movies, and it's just always in the background. It's always there. You kind of start the movie with a trade dispute, which people, they dismiss that as if, oh, this is not exciting stuff. But getting into the politics and the economies and things like that is fascinating. And just introducing the Jedi as just peacekeepers. We're badasses, but just peacekeepers. I thought that was great. And then when you finally got to see them whooping some butt, you're like, oh yeah, these guys are no joke. At the end of Phantom Menace, when they see Darth Maul and they finally confront him, they have all those guards and stuff there, and Padme, and they're like, oh, we'll handle this. They're badass. And it's incredible. Not to mention, you define Anakin's storyline by the Duel of the Fates. If Qui-Gon doesn't die, then Anakin gets raised by him with a true sort of father figure, and maybe he doesn't turn out into Darth Vader. But instead, Qui-Gon dies, and he's raised basically by Obi-Wan as a brother who sort of treats him like an insolent little brother. And that's the relationship that leads into the next few movies. Of course, he loves him, but he treats him like an annoying life form at first, and then just a pest, and like a little brother. And, Anakin's always trying to prove himself. And then finally, he's got the mentor in the Chancellor, and the Chancellor sort of hypes him up and builds him into what he eventually becomes. The political stuff with the Chancellor, taking control of the Republic and all that stuff, it's just masterful. He does all these things and does all these political maneuvers, and the Jedi, although they're badass, they're kind of sitting up in their high tower, and and their arrogance and their hubris doesn't allow them to see what's going on. And also it's clouded by the dark side. But they don't see the Chancellor doing this right under their nose. They're more focused on, like, should Anakin be training? Should he be a Jedi? All those things. And, they don't see this happening. So it was really, I thought, clever plotting. And, of course, the character work with Obi-Wan and Anakin as they sort of, all three movies come to a head. And you get it. You get this sense of Anakin, like, he loses his mom. Like, he's traumatized by his relationship with his mom in the beginning. Like, they're basically slaves. And although he's fine when he's little, he's ripped away from his mom and, trains and all these things, and essentially, like, misses his mom. And when he goes back to try to save her, and she's already dead and the Sand People had killed her, and he destroys all the women and children, like, out of vengeance and anger. There's no one there to help him. There's no one there to sort of teach him. Even Padme, who's sympathetic, she's a politician. She's got her own stuff going on. Have the problems on Naboo and all these things. So he doesn't really have anyone to lean on. He doesn't quite trust Obi-Wan because Obi-Wan, he seems to be hiding things from him. And so he takes it on his own and he goes, and eventually it leads him one step closer to the dark side. But he still feels bad about it when he tells Padme that he killed all the women and children. So you see this character constantly struggling with, doing what he's capable of and fulfilling his destiny as a great Jedi, and no one really letting him do that. So he turns to these darker ways and these darker impulses, and that actually gets him closer to joining the dark side, which eventually he does when he loses Padme. And of course, he senses that he's going to lose her. I mean, the Yoda speech about hate, suffering, anger, all this stuff, it illustrates a complex moral theme. That, like, although the first movies are about good versus evil, the second ones are about, well, even the good can turn evil under the right circumstances. This orphan kid, and then his mother is brutally killed. And then the love of his life and the mother of his kids dies. All of these things, lead up to him, choosing the dark side. He had the better mentor was for negative. I thought it was a great sort of allegory for, like, someone who's smart and capable can easily turn to a life of evil or crime or whatever you want to call it. And I thought that was just a smarter way to do it. Not to mention, for me as a film goer, that when Revenge of the Sith ends, it gave me the chills in the theater. Like, it was 30 years worth of filmmaking and storytelling being climaxed in that moment when he finally becomes Vader. It is outstanding. The battle scene between him and Obi-Wan is incredible. You see that these two are really good at what they do as Jedi. And then when he, becomes Darth Vader, it's so heartbreaking because you know where it's headed. That's why I prefer to watch them in that order, in the order of they were made, not in the 1, 2, 3 to 6. Because at the end of Revenge of the Sith, everyone who's watched the original 3, you're like, oh my God. Like, it's heartbreaking. It's tragic where he ended up in that moment because the pain and the death and destruction that he's going to cause. That's what makes Revenge of the Sith the best one because of that. Like, that moment in and of itself is just iconic. It just spans 30 years of storytelling. Incredible. So that is my take on the originals versus the prequels. The prequels, obviously there's some silly stuff, the Jar Jar Binks stuff, but he kind of goes away from that in the second and the third one. But I can watch the prequels every year. I'll watch them all. The original 3, they're a little harder because there's some slow moments, and I've probably seen them a lot. But all right, that is it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.